on YouTube now.
Cool.
Welcome back, folks. Appreciate you being here, whether live or on replay, for another best ball stream here from Occupy Fantasy. I'm your host tonight, NFL writer Chris, and I'm joined by our NBA writer, one of our NBA Summer League writers, one of our best ball contributors here, Chuck Silver. Chuck, how you doing this evening?
Doing pretty well. Best ball, summer league, fantasy stuff going on. I love it.
It's a great time of year for best ball. It's a great time of year to play any kind of fantasy sports contest here on Underdog Fantasy, the easiest, and I say every time we do a show together, Chuck, the best place to play fantasy sports contests. We actually do have some promo lines here, promo stats, available for Pick'em or Champions contest, depending on where you are watching and playing on Underdog from. I have a higher than half a stroke line here for Scotty Scheffler in tomorrow's Open Championship, the British Open. They'll be teeing off overnight for those of us here in the United States. Scotty Scheffler's round super early on Thursday morning, 10 a.m. my time here. So we have that, and we've got some other stats here I think that we could potentially play with to pair with that to maybe get some promo dollars in everybody's accounts to maybe enter some of these best ball contests, Chuck. So maybe we can revisit that at the end of the show. But the other thing that I wanted to talk about, obviously, it's not just these pick'em slip contests people can enter. There are several draft contests, which is the main subject matter of tonight's show. And while we are going to be doing an NFL contest tonight, Underdog did drop a couple of really interesting things. I see we have the Pup Cup here, which is catered to the PGA Tour's playoff tournament that'll be happening after the British Open here. So that's super interesting for those of you deep into the golf streets. And then for those of you that cannot wait for college football, we have huge news, I guess, in the virtual streets this week with College Football 25 from EA Sports coming out. First new college football video game in over a decade. Underdog is jumping on kind of the college football hype train, Chuck, with Best Bowl Mania, a college football best ball contest, which seems super fun for people that want to get into that as well. A super flex college football contest. So you going to be playing any of this at all?
I opened the rankings, and to me, it was like a computer-generated NCAA 25 roster. I don't recognize a single name, so unfortunately, probably not.
Yeah, so while this is open, I agree with you. I'm just not into the weeds tracking college football as closely as I once was. We do have a longtime friend and contributor to Occupy that does do some college football stuff in our Discord. For those of you that have been with us for a while, Lucas, I think we'll see if we can maybe get some thoughts from him in the Discord for any of you that are interested in playing this. I don't know if it'd be possible to get him on a stream or not. I know in the past he's been up for stuff like that, but I guess stay tuned for more college football content. It will not be from Chuck or myself. I can promise you that much. Maybe we'll co-host or something like that, but we will not be driving that type of content. Chuck, I wanted to look at Best Ball Mania 5 again tonight. I know we had the slow and the fast puppy drop in the last week. It looks like each of these contests is well on their way to being maxed out. So for those of you looking to start playing some NFL draft contests on Underdog, 150 max contests here in your preferred format of either a fast draft or a slow draft. Still available. Fast Puppy, just under 50% full. 20-second draft clock, I think, is a really, really nice option. I'd be shocked, Chuck, if next year they don't have at least the option for like quicker fast clocks in Best Ball Mania 5.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. And I've mentioned this before. I don't mind it when the whole tournament, the only option is 20 seconds. But if I have the option between 20 and 30 seconds, in the puppies, I'll probably do 20 seconds. But for like Best Ball Mania, I think I'm going to prefer to get that extra 10 seconds.
Here on the Occupy Fantasy website, we've been tracking ADP all spring and summer long. These are your fastest rising players over the last week, seeing their ADP get more expensive over the last 7 days. Tight end Noah Fant from the Seattle Seahawks, wide receiver Jalen Polk from the New England Patriots. We've got Gus Edwards, running back with the Chargers, Tyler Boyd, wide receiver with the Tennessee Titans. Ignore the team here. I'll get Moose to update that.
And then we got you transition it over to the screen? Do you have it pulled up? Not seeing it on the feed.
What happened? Oh, I completely lost the the screen share. Technical difficulties are always exciting. Are we good now? You see it?
Yes.
Okay. So talk about Fant, Polk, Edwards, Tyler Boyd with the Tennessee Titans, James Conner with the Arizona Cardinals. Those are your fastest rising players in ADP. Anything stand out to you here, Chuck, with this group?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about this. So Noah Fant, first of all, he's up like 35 spots at least in the last month, which seems insane because I did think he was a value before, but now he's getting into he's not as much of a value anymore. But like most of the names that I had more comments on the players that were falling. Not too much on these guys. I mean, it's a lot of the guys we've been talking about on stream that we're all drafting. So, but the
I got,
guys falling, like these are
yeah,
all players that have uncertain situations, and it seems like they were getting overdrafted before, and some of their ADPs will come back up with training camp starting up. But like every single player on this ADP fallers list is either we're uncertain about their talent or we're uncertain about their situation, which is probably normal. But I thought that was pretty
yeah.
interesting.
Obviously, the moves over the last 7 days are, half round or less. Ben Sinnott from the Washington Commanders, Roman Wilson from the Pittsburgh Steelers, pair of Jet wide receivers, Henry Miller with the New Orleans Saints, Ricky Pearsall with the 49ers. Jets, I think there's been some deep rumors about Devontae Adams potentially going to New York. I don't really know if that's actually going to happen, Chuck, but I think that's part of what's driving that down. I think we have one of our subscribers in the lobby with me tonight here. Jets 13 had the first overall pick here. He took Christian McCaffrey, a very, very smart move. I'm on the clock with the fifth overall pick. And Chuck, I need you to explain to me why I'm crazy for continuing to click on Amon-Ra St. Brown over Jamar Chase, because I have a hard time clicking on Jamar Chase this year.
I don't think it's crazy. I made a decision on Jamar Chase today because I thought I've been fading him, and I go and look, and I have 12% on every site and basically every format. And so I'm going to still take Jamar Chase when he falls past ADP. But now when I have like the 4 or 5 pick and Amon-Ra or Justin Jefferson are there, I'm probably going to take one of them almost every time. And so I love the Amon-Ra pick. And then I've noticed Justin Jefferson, he's going before Tyreek Hill. I've seen this a few times already, and because people think Jordan Addison's going to get suspended, I don't know if that's enough to drive Justin Jefferson up a couple spots, but I've been liking him all summer anyway.
We liked Justin Jefferson as the number 1 pick last year. Obviously, downgrade at quarterback, we think anyway, this season. So I don't mind taking Jefferson really in any of these spots. Chase, I just obviously we know the ceiling there, but I kind of prefer the order that these receivers went in this lobby tonight. I like him at that 6th pick or later after those other guys are all gone. I prefer these other 4 wide receivers to Jamar Chase this season.
Yeah, just it's tough. I kind of feel like people are still holding on to. I mean, Jamar Chase put up 51 fantasy points in one of the week 17s, BBM 3 maybe, and we know he has a single week upside, but it's been 2 years since we've really seen it. And he was good last season, but not 4th pick good. And he was a 2nd pick last year. So,
well, we learned looking at some of the data that you so generously shared with us a couple of streams ago with me anyway. Pairings with quarterbacks for your early receivers. I'm like super honed in on now, Chuck, on like basically not stacking Jared Goff with Amon-Ra St. Brown because it just feels like the ownership is untenable there. Are you prepared to kind of recap that for anybody who may have missed that show?
yeah, so it's basically just these top wide receiver ones, at least the guys we looked at, CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra. I don't know if we looked at anyone else, maybe Jamar Chase, but they're like, so with CeeDee Lamb, Dak Prescott was 50%. On 50% of CeeDee Lamb teams, that owner took Dak Prescott in the 150 drafts I've done on Underdog, which is just insane because the second highest was like 10% from any other random quarterback. And so what Chris is talking about is, especially a guy like Jalen Hurts with CeeDee Lamb is not nearly as owned. And you just get such leverage when everyone has that quarterback, and then your quarterback outscores Dak Prescott by 1 fantasy point. That could be the difference between 1st and 2nd in BBM. And the same thing goes for all the other top wide receiver ones. Just we still want their quarterbacks because there's a very strong correlation. But for the playoff week specifically, it's really advantageous to just have basically any other quarterback.
This is what I was thinking about actually, and I'll give a little bit of a shout out to some of the other content providers in these streets who almost certainly have more viewers than we do. But Justin Herzig, who contributes for Establish the Run, he posted a draft stream review on their channel today, a pre-recorded $10,000 entry draft he did with some high stakes players, and talked a little bit about a concept in that video that I thought was interesting, Chuck, where in a higher buy-in or in this case a higher buy-in and like lower field contest, he was talking about this concept of, you look at the advance rates and how the tournament is structured, 2 out of 12 advance out of the first round, and then you get into week 15, 16, and 17, and if you see a structure where it's like 1 out of 5 teams advance, then 1 out of 4, and then like 1 out of 2, or I'm making it up obviously, right? Like, he effectively outlined a format where actually the reverse is true of what you just said, where it's actually harder in the regular season than it is in the playoffs. So with that in mind, have you given any thought to like how you would build for tournaments where we want more floor, I guess, in regular season, which would not be the case here in Ball Mania 5, but maybe with like, I think the Mastiff or the Big Dog or like the higher dollar buy-in tournaments here. Like, I don't know if you're playing those, but have you thought about game theory there at all that maybe the people should be aware of?
I'm not playing any of those high buy-ins with like the small fields, but I think that the combo stuff we've been talking about applies much less to those. We are just less concerned with getting unique combos because the field is smaller and we get to the finals. Uh, rather than 30 40 people having Dak with our CD Lamb teams, there's only going to be maybe 2 or 3, unless Dak is like the super guy that goes off in week 16. But even then the field is so small, there's not enough Dak teams in the pool that you're really getting a lot of leverage doing the things we've been talking about in those small field contests.
Went with 3 receivers to start the draft here, and kind of keeping my options wide open, I would say, for quarterbacks, not just quarterbacks to pair with these guys, but I'm also looking at the run backs in the playoff weeks. I think there's still options on the table with the 49ers on the other side of Amon-Ra St. Brown's championship week matchup. Devontae Adams pairs nicely with some Saints players, and DJ Moore pairs nicely with some Seattle Seahawk players, and also has semifinals correlation with Amon-Ra St. Brown. So a little bit of double correlation there on the table with the Bears. So the reason I looked at that, something that I think if I had this pick over, is I probably would have gone with Michael Pittman Jr. to maybe go with an Anthony Richardson stack here, just for some more upside there. Just strictly speaking to my own portfolio, which I know the viewers don't necessarily care about as much. I want to get more Anthony Richardson than I currently have. And I do think of these 4 or 5 quarterbacks that go super early, I think he's a little bit underdrafted compared to the others ahead of him in terms of his upside, in terms of being the number 1 quarterback. Again, averaged most fantasy points per snap played last year. Limited opportunities, I understand that, but seems like even for a round 5 ADP play at the position, he could be slightly undervalued.
So I think this is my favorite opening in the 5 spot. Amon-Ra, Devontae, DJ Moore. Love all 3 of those guys. And then what you just said about consciously adding more Anthony Richardson, I've been doing that lately too. I'm perfectly happy pairing him with Josh Downs later if I don't get Pittman. But adding the elite quarterbacks overall is something that I've been trying to focus in on more, just because I'm a little too low on them in my portfolio, and I'm like so many drafts in that I think I need to kind of start correcting that over the next month. So I'm going to be focusing on getting more elite quarterbacks, and that's going to result in kind of pulling back on elite tight ends a little bit.
It's a little early for this talk, but I'll tease it a little bit, and we'll come back to it maybe in a couple of rounds. There's a running back on the board I'm heavily exposed to that we got some really positive news about this week, that if I end up being like super overexposed on that player, I think currently right now I have like 40 something % across all my teams in different contests. I'm not going to be upset about it because it just does not seem like that player's price is correcting at the pace it should just yet anyway. But that'll be a topic of conversation, I think, around, let's say, the 10th or 11th round. So remind me to get back to that when I'm willing to put it out there who I'm looking for. Jets 13, who I will make you part of our show if you're in the draft. That's totally fine. Christian McCaffrey with Kyron Williams in the first 2 running backs in the first 3 rounds. What are your thoughts on that start?
So this is something I was never doing before, but I've started adding it in. Just I think the running back value is so good early, and the more I dive into weekly winners, it's mostly talking about like weekly upside, single week upside, but I feel like that applies to the regular season too, and it kind of leads me to believe like Devin A. Chain and Kyron. Like we've been talking about Kyron's undervalue, but I'm coming around on Devin A. Chain being a good pick at ADP. It's just hard because great wide receivers are there. But I mean, if Jets 13 just pounds receivers for the next 3 or 4 rounds and then hits on a couple late guys, then could be in a pretty great spot since the field isn't really doing this as much as they probably should.
I recently did a draft. I just took Isaiah Pacheco. We made him the cover boy on tonight's show. Kudos to you for doing that.
Nice.
This is a running back that I'm also trying to get more exposure to.
Mm-hmm.
The Chiefs publicly have talked about, it's kind of crazy when you think about they won the Super Bowl, being disappointed in their offense last year and trying to be more efficient, more explosive this year. Yes, obviously that's good news for Patrick Mahomes in the passing game, but Chuck, I have to believe that's also good news for Isaiah Pacheco. He'll be carried along by how efficient they're being in that offense. I think it's still pretty clear that he's the number one running back on this roster, despite maybe some back of the roster changes they made here in the offseason, some late draft picks, some free agent additions. Just does not really seem like Pacheco's price has changed dramatically in best ball over, from 2023 to 2024, and probably should be someone that we buy pretty heavily, especially when we go wide receiver heavy for the first 2 or 3 rounds here.
This is one of the guys that I thought was interesting that was on the rising list. I think he's up 2.5 spots in ADP over the last week, 2.4 spots, which isn't that significant, but 45 to 42.6. I mean, it's something. And so I don't know what's driving it, but maybe we are getting into August where the field is going to start adjusting and taking running backs a little bit earlier.
What do you, we've talked about this. I think it may have been over a year since you and I have talked about this. So I guess it's good to put this back on the table. What should people know in best ball about quarterback running back stacks that we don't necessarily talk about as much in like single week contest formats? That's a good thing in this contest, right?
Yeah. For regular season advance rate anyway, every combination of quarterback, running back, receiver, or tight end that I checked had a positive effect on regular season advance rate. So basically just don't avoid taking the running back with your quarterback. And this applies to rushing quarterbacks. This applies to running backs that don't catch passes. It's kind of just, I have to think it's just something with the offense being good. But I don't necessarily target it that much. Maybe if the running back catches passes, but I'm not avoiding it. Like if someone falls to me at ADP, I'm very happy to take that same team correlation.
And obviously, I teed that up nicely because I'm going to go with Patrick Mahomes here to pair with Isaiah Pacheco. Mahomes, another player I'm trying to get more exposure to. Sounds like we're aligned there, trying to get more of the elite quarterbacks. And Chuck, by virtue of having Mahomes and Pacheco, I think I've got a really, really good chance of having exposure to like 95% plus of all of Kansas City's offensive touchdowns this year between the two of them.
My guy.
So I'm happy with that. Yeah.
One problem that I have, so every other in these top 5 quarterbacks, I'm okay if I end up with the rest of them naked. I don't really care. And most of them have a guy I can tag on at the end of the draft anyway. Patrick Mahomes doesn't really. And so if I miss out on Marquise Brown and that guy just took Rashee Rice, like you have Pacheco. But if I take Mahomes on a team that doesn't have Pacheco, hoping that Rashee Rice will make it back to me in this next round, and it's getting harder because his ADP is going up. I don't know. It feels kind of bad to have Mahomes naked. And I think I have taken like Justin Watson in the last round, but I don't know who else I could possibly take. I saw someone mention the backup tight end, but I don't know anything about him.
I think you do. If I told you who he was, I would guarantee you know something about him. I'm going to pull up the Chiefs roster here just to keep myself honest. I did look at this before we went live. We've got Noah Gray, who has been the backup for a couple of seasons. And there is a free agent addition who has joined the Kansas City Chiefs this year, who was with the Cincinnati Bengals last year, was with the Minnesota Vikings, I believe. Before that, had high draft capital early in his NFL career, has never really matched the hype. We have Irv Smith Jr. on the Kansas City Chiefs roster here. The formula is there, my friend. If we sneak Irv Smith through in a large field contest like this to the playoff weeks, and we're not rooting for this necessarily in general, but if anything happens that makes Travis Kelce unavailable to play in those weeks, and you have an Irv Smith team there, and he's the guy that Patrick Mahomes is throwing touchdown passes to. I think that might be one of my favorite late round picks for Chiefs pairings with Mahomes, just because there's less, I guess, inertia to him being on the field. There's less hurdles to him earning a larger role than some of these wide receivers. Like, yeah, I guess you could, Chuck, take a shot on, you mentioned Justin Watson. There's also Sky Moore, Kadarius Toney, Mecole Hardman. Justin Ross is still kicking around on this roster. We'll see if he makes it through preseason and actually makes it onto the roster. But I think I would rather take a shot on a backup tight end there if I was truly desperate for a stack partner with Mahomes.
That's kind of funny, man. Irv Smith, because when you scroll down by ADP, it lists Jared Wiley and Noah Gray as a tight end 2 and 3 on the Chiefs. Irv Smith is tight end 4. Yeah, I don't think I realized Irv Smith was on this team. Like, that's a deep shot in the last round. Like, you get him to the finals. You're the only player in the finals that has him on a roster.
He's legitimately going to be 0% owned in this contest. There's no question. Like, virtually, like he'll be a rounding error in this contest is what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
I think I basically did a draft a couple of days ago where I did this exact same thing. And I think I read today that the Chiefs don't plan to restrict Xavier Worthy's role at all starting the season. I think last year with Rashee Rice, we saw that. He kind of got eased into a larger role, but this was Kansas City's first round pick this year, Chuck. There's some uncertainty with Rashee Rice's availability due to legal issues. Travis Kelce's another year older. We already know some of those other receivers I just talked about are quote unquote not it, if you will, in Kansas City's offense. I love doing something like this with Patrick Mahomes. You're not building a stack it's not off the table, I guess, but by not intentionally targeting a stack with one of my early wide receiver picks and building a stack like here in the middle rounds or potentially even later, I think we're lowering the ownership of our stack we're rooting for in the playoff weeks, building that way. And I don't think this is very controversial. This is the most successful quarterback in the NFL in the post-Tom Brady era. He's one of the guys I'm very happy to do that with.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love this. And I actually kind of forgot about Xavier Worthy. And do you remember how high this guy was going after he got drafted to the Chiefs? And now he's falling. This is the first time. I've seen him, Rashee Rice taken before, but their ADPs are about to flip for the first time, which is, I don't know, it's just kind of interesting.
Yeah, as of right now, everyone's expecting the starting 3 wide receivers to be Worthy, Hollywood Brown, and Rashee Rice. And I'm certainly not going to argue with that. But I will absolutely take I'll take Rashee Rice, but I'll take Xavier Worthy in the 6th round here pretty much all day long if it stays this way, especially to pair him with Patrick Mahomes. So now that I've done that, we're a little more interested in the Pittsburgh Steelers, Houston Texans, and the Cleveland Browns in the playoff weeks. So I will be looking at some of those players for correlation-related reasons for the curious viewers at home this evening. That is kind of what we're looking at doing next. I don't have a tight end just yet, so I do think there are a couple options from those teams I can consider that I'm super high on. I'm probably going to start filling out running back a little bit more, and I think I'm just going to wait on quarterback. Now that I have an elite quarterback on my roster, I don't really have to go crazy with my second quarterback. I think that's also something people should be aware of. If you're investing this high of a pick in a Mahomes or a Richardson or whoever, I think you're basically already invested in them being the correct quarterback that you need. So I don't think you need to get too crazy with how you're building quarterback on your roster. What do you think about
that? No, I completely agree. I don't mind having a second quarterback capable of putting up a good week in the playoffs. And keep in mind, in my head, that's Baker Mayfield. So the bar is very low. Just have a player who's going to probably be starting weeks 15 through 17 just as a backup. Like 3 years ago, I think Daniel Jones and Tom Brady were the only quarterbacks to drop 30 in the championship week, and they were both very late round picks. So just having another out on top of Patrick Mahomes, like, you have to have a second quarterback. I don't think you have to have 3. I will say there's times I accidentally draft a second quarterback with the same bye week as my elite quarterback. In those situations, in BBM specifically, how often are you going to tack on that third quarterback?
Man, I question taking the 0, from a spot where you're going to get 15 plus points conservatively. I really do think you probably need to tack on that third quarterback at the end of the draft if you make that mistake. So now that you've pointed that out, I absolutely want to make sure that the quarterback I do take does not have a week 6 bye, because that is the bye that the Chiefs have. I'm not going to have a Pittsburgh running back fall to me. I've seen this happen a few times, even though the ADP isn't fully there. Jalen Warren flipping Najee Harris in tonight's draft board. That was interesting.
Yeah, I want to say Jalen Warren's ADP is actually higher than Najee on one of the other sites, which I think is incorrect, but I'm just going to keep taking Najee at a perceived discount. So I'm taking a bunch of Warren too, but if I have the choice, I'm taking Najee.
Eighth round here, coming up on the 90s. Jameson, that's a wide receiver. I've got some Detroit players now that I took. David Montgomery, touchdown machine, that we hope for the Lions, now that he's on my roster alongside Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'm having a hard time talking myself into Jameson Williams. We're into year 3 now of the Alabama product there. I don't see the ceiling really with Jameson Williams. Do I have a blind spot here? How are you? How exposed are you to this player from the Lions?
Dude, I have one share, and I'm so annoyed about it because I had basically like what is my perfect start through 6 rounds, and then I auto picked Jameson Williams with the in the 7th round, and I was so mad about it. Like I probably have more than one share of him, but I'm just so out on him. I'd rather have 20. There's probably 12 wide receivers from here to Gabe Davis that I'd rather have over Jameson Williams. So
player you're not intentionally clicking on, so you're basically in the same boat as me. Let's get back to Jets 13's build here. He went with a lot of wide receivers after he went with the 2 running backs early, which I think is the directionally correct move here. 4 wide receivers in a row after Kyren Williams. So we'll see how he does at the other positions, tight end, quarterback, as it comes back to him here.
I like that. I like that build he's got going. I've talked about him out on Lad McConkey, but I mean, if you're in on him, just the point is just pick a receiver there and you're good.
Okay. I don't feel great. I have incentive to look at a Cincinnati player, but I don't feel great about Zach Moss's stranglehold on the Bengals running back role. How are you feeling about Moss and Chase Brown?
I'm probably like 6-1 Moss to Brown. Okay. Yeah, I can't come around on Chase Brown. Is he even good? Like Zach Moss might be good. I'm not saying he's definitely good, but he might be good.
I punted that off until the next round and just went with what I view as some easy points here with Tyler Lockett. Circling back to my early picks here, I had some correlation with Seattle to emphasize with DJ Moore. So that was definitely on my mind there as I made that selection. And the wide receiver pickings at this point, when you look at ADP, super slim. It looks like we got Josh Palmer, Rashid Shaheed around pick 120, which is 25 picks from now. So having 5 receivers already when we get into this portion, if you will, of the draft board, I feel very good about that pretty much every single time.
Yep. Me too. I will say, I'm like I mentioned, I'm targeting running backs a little bit more early, but it's like really tough. Like if Tyler Lockett was your wide receiver 4, I feel like this team would feel significantly weaker. But just hit on a couple rookies. Like you're looking at a running back with your next pick.
I'm definitely looking at a running back with my next pick. And I think I'm considering the correlations that I have available to me. Certainly Raheem Mostert with the Miami Dolphins. I think it was, I'm going to take a shot in the dark here. I saw it. I think it's Josh Larkey, who works for Player Profiler, talking about taking the under on Raheem Mostert's touchdown line in major sports books this year. I don't hate the thesis there, but at the cost in drafts, right around pick 100, I still think I'm in on Raheem Mostert with the Dolphins. They have A-Chain going super early. They introduced Jalen Wright in the draft, but that is a player in this particular range at running back that I'm super light on that I think I want to get some more of.
Do you know what the line is? The touchdown line?
8.5.
Oh, I mean, if Raheem Mostert scores 8 touchdowns from this ADP, I feel like that's still pretty good.
This is not a stack that I think I have built at all. I don't know if I've intentionally looked for it. Jordan Love, Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed with the Green Bay Packers. What do you think about that?
I love it. Yeah, I think it's great. I'm doing it a lot. The one thing I will say back to the combinations thing is this is like Jordan Love and CMC are very commonly paired together. It's like 25% or 20%. But I do think it's good.
So I'm taking Nick Chubb here at pick 101. I completely misled everybody by talking about Raheem Mostert, who I'm obviously interested in. I'm not saying that I'm not, but this is the player that I think is obscenely mispriced. We've got nothing but positive news on his recovery from his brutal injury all year long. We have him deadlifting on the NFL.com Twitter feed without a brace on his legs. He's not listed on any type of non-football injury or PUP list yet, anyway, out of Cleveland. This was a first-round pick last year, Chuck. This was the focal point of Cleveland's offense. Even if he is not going to see that volume, he's going to be better than a 13th round pick. And I feel like he's going to be picked probably closer. I'll say Travis Etienne Jr., Josh Jacobs, I think is probably where he should be. What do you think about that?
I think
in
it's
that ADP range.
I think it's an optimistic projection, but I don't think it's wrong. Like I don't think his ADP will get anywhere close to them. So if you do think that his ranking is similar, then he's going to be a value for the next 50 days.
I don't see any player in this range that I'm like jumping for joy to put on my roster. And I should mention that, yes, I reached here, but I am somewhat still thinking about unique combinations. I have incentive to consider Cleveland with the Chiefs stack in the playoffs. There is a matchup with the Browns in week 15. So Chubb, obviously more likely to be contributing definitely by that point of the season than the beginning if you're still super concerned about the injury. But I do think at this point, I'm feeling very, very good that Nick Chubb is going to be available right out of the gate, which obviously feels very incredible if you witnessed his gruesome injury in primetime last season, Chuck. But we have a starting running back that I think week in and week out is going to project as like a top 5, top 10 running back in most week to week models that you can get in the second half of draft contests. I have no problem having heavy Nick Chubb bags this year. I've pretty much said that from the jump of the spring when we started doing shows together. And I've only seen things that have made me even more optimistic all summer. So I'm still buying.
One thing I want to mention with the ADP risers and fallers. So I thought it was kind of quick how fast Jerome Ford rose up the draft board. He was going at like pick 140, and today he's at pick 125. That's actually lower than I thought. I thought he was a little bit higher than this. But he's not falling as fast as he rose, and he's not falling as fast as Nick Chubb is climbing. So I've been avoiding Jerome Ford, but I packed my bags like 3 weeks ago on him, so I'm okay with it.
We got a new offensive coordinator in Cleveland this year too, so I think that's going to play a role in how people are forecasting Cleveland's offense. Alex Van Pelt is now in New England running the Patriots offense this season, so it will be interesting to see how that plays out as well. Some of my quarterback targets that went paired with my early receivers now coming off the board, but I'm not super concerned about that. We have built plenty of alternative outs here. Geno Smith, Deshaun Watson, kind of somewhat on my radar as second quarterback options. That quickly came back to me. A 1-3-5 build. Still do not have a tight end. Where are we? Pick 116. Dallas Goedert is a very easy click here, isn't he?
Yep.
But I don't really have correlation-related reasons to click on him. So is it a mistake to take him here, or are you still happy to buy him as a standalone play?
Overall, I think like I didn't get a good look at who was available, but regardless of who it is, we know the positions. And I think at this pick, because I've been in the spot a lot, and I think Dallas Goedert adds more points than anyone else that you could pick in this spot right here. Because you're comfortable at every position, you're not desperate for anything. And I do think Goddard's a tier above Schultz and Kmet.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that right there is also something I would think about in formats where the regular season portion of the contest is more important. You probably should focus on filling out at least like the starters in each of your positions to have a little bit more floor. So in some of those smaller contests, definitely, Chuck, that's where I would almost certainly make sure I kind of draw that line at Dallas Goedert. Or I'm willing to have Dalton Schultz as my starting tight end as well. I think that is the true line for me. But this like 10th, 11th round, if I don't already have a starting tight end by then, in non like BBM or puppy formats, I feel like that is a mistake.
So back to your question earlier about this unique combos and what you mentioned about Herzig talking about floor through the regular season. So if we're reaching constantly to get these unique combos, which you have to do, I do think it slightly lowers your floor for the regular season. So it's going to have a slight hit on your advance rate. But when you get to the playoffs, your chances of advancing in each round, I think, are going to outweigh whatever teams you missed getting to the playoffs in the first place. Just you're going to have more EV when you actually get there. And so, take that for what it's worth.
I've been praising John's draft all show. So I will take one shot across the bow here with the Javonte Williams pick. That's a player that I'm happy to have 0% of, and we'll probably keep it that way all summer long. Now, I will say 2 running backs that I faded last year were Kenneth Walker III and Travis Etienne Jr., and that did not necessarily work out very well for me. So maybe that is a good thing for Javonte Truthers, but I know you and I are both kind of aligned here on being super skeptical on Javonte Williams this year.
Unlike Jameson Williams, I will not have 0% Javonte, but I only take him if I'm super desperate for a running back who could start, or if he falls past ADP by a round, then I'm taking him. But I'll end up with like 3, maybe 4%, which I'm okay with. Considering how much McLaughlin I have to hedge a little bit.
Need is strong. I need correlation with the Steelers and with the Texans. So even though I just took Dallas Goedert, you have any problem with going with Freiermuth or Dalton Schultz here?
No, I love it.
Back tight ends.
I think it's great.
I think I'm going to go with Freiermuth just to prioritize Week 17 here, and we'll see if there's something I can do about Houston later in the draft. I think Houston's bench is something that is somewhat underdrafted. You've got high costs on Nico, Diggs, Dell, Mixon, Stroud. Schultz still has a pretty reasonable price, but this next tier, Chuck, Noah Brown, John Mechie, Dameon Pierce at running back. They're Dameon Pierce, 17th, 18th round pick. The other 2 receivers virtually undrafted. Are you considering these guys at all when you're looking for Houston pieces, or are you kind of out on their second string players, if you will?
I was out until you or Brian mentioned Noah Brown last week, and so I've been taking him in the last round of drafts. It's just keeping it very simple. He's a player capable of spike weeks, so That's it.
Yep, and also keeping it very simple. We don't have to worry about identifying which week he's going to have those or which week he's going to pop in our lineups, but we know he's a very, very capable NFL wide receiver. And I mean, this truly, I guess, is not saying much, but it's kind of funny to characterize it this way. Probably on the short list of best wide receiver 4 in the league, right? So he's one of these guys at the end of the contest where I think it makes sense if you're still looking for some correlation to consider him. And I think given how I started at receiver on this particular team, he is a player that will be on the short list for me to kind of round out my wide receiver core because I feel pretty good about the floor in my wide receiver room, especially at this point.
I have his game log pulled up from last year. This is full PPR scoring. Underdog's half PPR, so take away 3 or 4 points from each of these scores. But in Week 9 against Tampa Bay, he put up 27 fantasy points. In Week 10 against Cincinnati, he put up 24. In Week 15 against Tennessee, he put up 22. This is insane. 153 yards and a touchdown on 6 catches, 172 yards on 7 catches. Just the fact that we know he's done this before. He's probably one of the better late round picks. I mean, if we're drafting all the other Houston receivers that high, we've been talking about how all 3 of them can't hit. One of them gets hurt. Noah Brown is going to destroy his ADP if he's that third guy. If we're drafting Tank Dell as a third guy in the 40s, what if Noah Brown slots into that spot?
Noah Brown was that player that was very popular as an underpriced daily fantasy player on some of the other sites in low risk contests. And so you'd see his ownership in tournaments be like 20, 30%. That was just annoying because you just outlined it. He had those spike weeks, week in and week out, tied to a very good quarterback. I think that's the same is going to be true this year. And look, we get it. It's the NFL. Things happen. We're not necessarily rooting for them. But if anything happens to those receivers ahead of him on the depth chart, that's also another way that he's going to play his way into a larger role. So that's enough talking about 18th round picks from the Houston Texans. I have to make a decision about who I want right now. And I think what I want to do here is let's see. I don't want my quarterback just yet. I don't really have a lot of Marshawn Lloyd here on Underdog, and I'm
Okay.
happy to mix him into my portfolio because I think there's standalone value here in Green Bay's backfield behind Josh Jacobs. I think there'll be like kind of a 1A, 1B situation. Maybe I'm super off base there, but I'm just kind of betting on the upside here with this player right on ADP and feeling pretty good about this stable of workhorse running backs as I view them with these four guys on my roster right now.
So I have a ton of Marshawn Lloyd, and I'm still clicking on him in ADP like every other draft. But I will say it is getting kind of scary how high he's getting without getting any kind of confirmation out of training camp. I mean, I'm pretty sure he's the backup in front of AJ Dillon, but I think AJ Dillon is still getting paid. So
I'm excited to see some of these wild moves in ADP that will strictly happen because of preseason performances and training camp news. We're super close to that. Training camps, I believe, open across the league starting next week, Chuck. So we're going to start to see draft position move. We're going to start to see more users entering these contests that haven't necessarily started entering the draft lobbies. I think we were talking in Discord today about how the draft lobbies on one of the other sites are super interesting right now because there's like some promos that are drawing people in and the draft picks are all over the board. So Underdog has historically always been slightly sharper, slightly more competitive, but we will see things get a little bit interesting here over the rest of the draft season for the reasons I just talked about.
oh, and I can't wait. And so on that thing about getting like ADP value. So one thing that I pride myself in is going back at the end of draft season, looking at which teams I got the most ADP value in, and looking back at the teams I drafted, a couple months ago when we first started drafting. I don't have that many teams with insane ADP value, which is kind of surprising to me. I mean, there haven't been that many guys that have, really catapulted in ADP, but it's going to be really fun to see guys jump up 50 spots in ADP from one note out of training camp or one good preseason game, stuff like that.
I'm still holding out hope that there's a quarterback still on the board here that can turn back the clock to like 4 or 5 years ago and be the elite version of himself that we once saw before he somewhat disgraced himself publicly in the news. I'm talking, of course, about Deshaun Watson of the Cleveland Browns. I'm doubling up on quarterback, running back stacks on this roster. I feel like there's a scenario where Deshaun Watson on rosters with Patrick Mahomes could be an interesting play, especially if he has big playoff games and outscores Patrick Mahomes. How do you feel about Deshaun Watson? I know you're super into Baker Mayfield in this range. I've talked you into maybe clicking on Geno Smith a bit more, but Watson to me is my guy down here that I think is the quarterback I can't stop clicking on, frankly.
Well, like on my regular BBM exposures on Underdog, it's like Deshaun Watson and Baker Mayfield at the top, and then it's everybody else. And so I don't feel great about it. Like I feel good about Baker. I don't feel good about Deshaun, but I'm drafting so much of his guys, and if he hits, he's such a value in this range that if it doesn't work out, all right, 15% of my teams don't have a backup quarterback. It's not a huge deal.
I'll even take this a step further right now, just still based off of the ADP cost. I don't often advocate for overstacking. I think having two teammates with a quarterback is probably as far as I'll go in these formats, especially in the 18-round contest, not the 20-round contests. But Deshaun Watson, Nick Chubb, Amari Cooper, and David Njoku. We can look at Cleveland's ADP actually here right on the screen. We got Cooper pick 40 and Njoku pick 102. Some of the other players, Judy at receiver, Ford at running back, Chubb at running back. This is an extremely easy offense to stack, Chuck. And I do think there's a really, really good chance that this team as a whole, I want to say Cleveland has like a 9.5 win total in traditional betting markets. They seem very underpriced to me, and I'm happy to overstack this roster.
Yeah, actually, it looks, well, I don't know about triple stacks, but double stacks with Deshaun and two other players. I have 8 times out of my 155. So it's actually more than I would have expected. But I guess it makes sense. Deshaun's my highest exposed quarterback after Baker. We had a couple questions in the chat. I am the Kai. Sorry if you're not here anymore, but CEH over Irv Smith late.
Yeah, I've taken, I think we've both justified clicking on CEH a few times. at the end of contests. I guess what we were talking about at that time, if you're still here, is like pass catching partner that could get some touchdowns from Patrick Mahomes late. And so I don't know how involved in the passing game CEH is going to be. More importantly, I guess, to the roster that I've built here tonight, I don't know if that makes sense to do with Pacheco, because I'm kind of betting on Pacheco being the running back, getting those opportunities on this team and not CEH. But I would take CEH in the 18th round. I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, I've been. He's one of the not uncomfortable picks in round 18. Not saying he's necessarily comfortable, but I don't mind clicking on him if I'm desperate for another running back.
I'm like
This,
most comfortable in this range clicking on Antonio Gibson. He's one of those players I think I'm almost overdrafting at this point. It feels like he's very, very easily going to beat ADP down here, Chuck.
yeah, talk me back into him because I was in on him when we first started doing the streams, and now like Tyler Algier was there. I'm clicking him over Antonio Gibson most of the time. Whatever other zero RB, I don't know. I just for some reason just completely came off of him.
I just think it's because of the passing game upside. I think he's a little bit of a safer bet for passing down work in New England's offense this year. I could potentially mix in as like this is one of those kind of faux pas in the fantasy space, I guess. Say year in and year out with different running backs, but could mix in as like a slot receiver from time to time. So if anything happens to Nick Chubb, if anything happens to Ramondre Stevenson, we have that contingent value. Had the Browns on my mind there because New England has their old offensive coordinator. So I'm kind of thinking about Ramondre and Gibson more of as like the old Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt duo. And if you think back to where those players were drafted at their peak in that offense, I think they both had standalone value in fantasy in their best seasons. And I believe Hunt had a much higher ADP on those draft boards than Gibson has today. So that's primarily the reason I'm still on Gibson. We know he's talented enough to produce when he gets the touches, and I feel pretty good about him getting, 7 to 10 touches a week in New England's offense this year.
Okay, nice. Got to start drafting him again then.
All right. And I kind of went away from receivers here, so I'm going to start to fill that out a little bit more. Let's see here. I'm like refusing to draft Quentin Johnston. I can't responsibly tout Quentin Johnston in any way, shape, or form. But I will take Adam Thielen, mostly because I'm trying not to only draft Rashad Bateman in this range. I have a lot of him thus far. We saw spike weeks with Thielen last year. We're hoping for a little bit of a turnaround in this offense. I know he's another year older here, but definitely is a player that I could see outproducing his ADP as well down here.
I'm pretty in on Thielen. Yeah. At ADP. We had one more in here from Gobbler. Chubb did have a second surgery in November, if that affects your opinion on Chubb. Before Chris answers, I just will say, I don't care what happened 8 months ago. I saw a video of this guy squatting 700 pounds yesterday. So the second surgery, it's already so far past mattering.
What is the most, I guess in modern context, no one's going to be impressed by this name, but didn't we have Cam Akers suffer not the same injury? I think it was an Achilles, not a knee, but like a brutal training camp injury and then return in the same season. Like the recovery timelines in general for these players is just so much faster than it used to be. And I think Nick Chubb is trending towards being yet another example of that here, Chuck.
Yeah, I still am going to question the ceiling. I can't imagine they're going to give him the same workload that he had, even towards the end of the season. But in terms of efficiency, I'm not too worried about it. And like Chris has been touting all summer, his ADP is just going to be a value until the season starts.
If he retains some form of a red zone goal line role, if he sees maybe not 70, 80% of team carries, but 10 to 15 rushes every single week, he's absolutely going to beat out the other running backs he's being drafted around currently. And I think that is primarily why, every show that I do ends up being the Nick Chubb show. I get it. I'm waiting for someone to complain about it at this point. But I'm just going to hammer this point home until people get it. Nick Chubb should absolutely be drafted higher than he is. I think he's going to be a player that when your league, your home league mates sit down to draft this year and you take him at the end of your draft contest in the 14th, 15th round, when your unfortunate casual buddies are taking their second defense or their second kicker for whatever goddamn reason they're doing that, and you take Nick Chubb, he's going to be the guy that they're going to be like, oh, I forgot that he existed. Wow, he's still on the board, and they're going to regret that come week 8, week 9. And that's the type of player I want a lot of in this type of format.
If nothing else, just look at him like a rookie shot. He's probably better than most of the rookies you're taking shots on anyway. Juwan Johnson is a guy I'm tacking on at tight end in basically every draft right now.
All right. Going back to my Chiefs exposure, I need a Texan. I think it's a little early to do what we were talking about there. At receiver, I need some of these guys here to be worth owning. I think the one that I feel the best about in this range, and maybe I'm overemphasizing veteran production, something that I've seen before, but Tyler Boyd feels like he'll be a good play in this Titans offense this year, Chuck. Should be one of the 3 starting receivers, starting slot receiver for Will Levis. Probably should benefit from defenses trying to cover both Hopkins and Ridley at the same time and be open underneath for Will Levis. So I like him late.
Yeah, I actually talked myself in. I'm taking Tyler Boyd a bunch, but like Will Levis and the Tennessee offense specifically, I talked myself into them for like a week, and now I'm talking myself out of it. I'm still taking the receivers. I'm just not taking Will Levis ever anymore.
I can't say that I've taken him on purpose, if that makes sense. So, I'm with you there, but we've talked about it a couple times. We expect that offense in general to shift more pass heavy. So there's definitely value with these guys as a result. I think it's a good time for me to look at probably just 2 more receivers to round out this roster. 2-5-9-2. So maybe 1 receiver, 1 running back. I'm not entirely sure here, but definitely going to try to nail my Houston correlation. I'll be done with the Chiefs stack. I guess with Watson, I could look for a Bengal. I could look for a Dolphin for week 16, week 17. I'm not as concerned about that here. This roster admittedly doesn't have as much playoff correlation as I want, but maybe that ends up working in our favor because we know that the field is, I guess, somewhat overdrafting that now that we've looked at combos of players and opening myself up to having a little bit of a more unique, uncorrelated playoff roster. Not, again, I would prefer to have the correlated roster, but I guess I'm rationalizing it here and making a case for why it's not necessarily a bad thing to not have that.
While we're at the end of the draft here, I wanted to talk to you about something. So when we were talking about the QB wide receiver combos in our staff chat last week, a few things stood out to me. The wide receiver 1 on Philadelphia gets drafted 1% of the time. The wide receiver on Minnesota gets drafted 1% of the time, wide receiver 3. And with this Jordan Addison stuff, is it Brandon Powell? Is he the wide receiver 3 in Vikings? Is there anyone viable we can draft from either of these offenses?
Brandon Powell.
The same goes for
Pittsburgh too. Trent Sherfield. Yeah, Pittsburgh. We have we talked about Van Jefferson. I think on a couple of the shows. There's also Calvin Austin, Wes Watkins, formerly of the Eagles. I'm on the clock here, and I made the case for why I wanted him. So we're going to take Noah Brown. I think it's definitely worth taking shots on those guys, Chuck. I don't see any reason not to do that. Is somebody like Jeff Wilson with the Miami Dolphins too deep of a cut for you here? Yeah, I mean, literally could end up being a cut, I guess, for the Dolphins this year. I have a little bit of incentive to consider a Miami player. I don't know how I'm feeling about receivers, tight ends that are still on the board here. Jonnu's gone, so I don't really care about Durham Smythe. I don't know if there's really, other than Malik Washington, which is kind of like a hot rookie commodity down here, I think people are selecting. I don't know how I feel about these guys.
I'm okay taking shots on guys like Malik Washington, Devontae Walker, whatever other rookies at the end of drafts. Those running backs you just mentioned might be a little like Jeff Wilson. He's on my mind, but it's too deep for even me.
And he's got to be the 4th guy in the pecking order now, at least we think, with Jalen Wright introduced to the picture there. So that's what's keeping me honest and not clicking on him. But, trusted veteran that knows, quote unquote, knows the offense, knows Mike McDaniel's offense from the San Francisco days and the Miami days here. So I could see him being retained on the roster, but I don't know how much value he's going to have. And I really don't want to go into week 1 with a dead roster spot because somebody got cut. I mean, there's going to be injuries that we can't avoid. We accept that. But if I think a player's on the wrong side of the roster bubble, I don't really know if I want to add them to my roster at this point, and that's where I think Jeff Wilson is.
So we talked about Chubb. I mentioned Jerome Ford. Deontay Foreman just went in the 17th round, and he's grown to be a guy that if I'm desperate for a running back, he's one of the comfortable clicks in the last round.
I like him down here. I like the player I've clicked on probably a little too much that I'm avoiding at this point just to even out exposures. Estime with the Denver Broncos. I saw Keaton Mitchell with the Ravens was just recently placed on the pup list. I have quite a bit of him, so there are running backs down here that I like clicking on. Kenneth Gainwell, even with Philadelphia, is still somebody I'm interested in drafting. I'm still on the, I think anyway, the correct side of history there with him as well if I'm super desperate for a running back. I love this Trey Tucker selection, by the way.
Trey Tucker. Yeah, Trey Tucker and the guy on Tampa Bay are two like sleeper wide receiver threes that I think are going overlooked.
Trey Palmer. Is
Yeah,
that who you're talking about?
yeah, Trey Palmer. Yeah, two Treys. Especially if Devontae Adams gets traded. I mean, that probably had something to do with Trey Tucker getting drafted there.
Shout out MVS. Let's go. Entering the draft board. I haven't seen him get drafted too much. Conversely, here's another wide receiver 3 coming off the board in Jawan Jennings. I don't know if I'm super. You've taken him. I have not. I don't know if I'm interested, to be honest with you.
I can be talked into it. I don't know, because I don't think Ricky Pearsall's injury is very serious. He went on the non-football participation list, whatever, but they don't expect to be serious. But trade talk feels good.
I feel pretty good about these 5 running backs. Pacheco, Montgomery. I'm overly optimistic on Chubb. I understand that, but I think he's a starter as well. And then we got Lloyd and Gibson. So I think I will go with a 9th wide receiver here. And I am going to take Cedric Tillman over Elijah Moore with the Cleveland Browns. I don't know if most depth chart forecasts have it this way, Chuck, but I feel like a lot of the early news out of Cleveland camp, Cleveland beat writers like Mary Kay Cabot have put out there that they expect Cedric Tillman to be in starting wide receiver sets for the Browns, which means I have obviously the Browns quarterback here to pair a receiver with. So I'm interested in Cedric Tillman as a late round flyer as well. I don't know how much we've talked about him this year.
He might have came up once, I think, or maybe it was in the staff chat. Someone brought him up.
I mean, if you did a show with Derek, he absolutely talked about him because he's a former Tennessee Volunteer. So there's no way Derek hasn't mentioned that just yet.
There you go.
This was awesome. I feel pretty good about this team. Anytime I can stack with Patrick Mahomes, obviously I'm going to like that. But we ended up with a 2-5-9-1 build, pretty close to the optimal format, I would say. And hey, we'll see how this goes throughout, obviously, the rest of the spring, summer, and into the fall. But I feel pretty good about the way this team came together tonight. I appreciate you joining me as always. If you're not yet playing on Underdog, we have a promo code on the screen, Occupy2. You can use that to sign up today and get matched up to $250 on your first time deposit, 50% deposit match. So that means you deposit $500, Underdog, and we give you $250 to play with for free. Very, very, very awesome promo. One of the best we've ever really seen from any fantasy sports company. Promised people at the beginning of the show, I have a promo line here for Scotty Scheffler. Do you have anything you like pairing with him tonight? I believe the max that you can do with these promo stats is like a $10 entry fee. So if we're just going to do a 2-pick slip here and put $20 in the account for people to start playing some of these contests with, what's your favorite line to pair with him tonight? I know you were looking at Summer League for our daily plug in DFS streets tonight, Chuck. So is there anybody in the Summer League tonight that you're looking at?
Based off of like numbers and statistics and stuff, there's nothing that I really like. But I have Bronny James over 3.5 rebounds. So,
oh my God! All right, I will join you and have some pain here. Well, let's see if we can turn $10 into 30 with Bronny James.
That's
gross. God, I'm getting absolutely destroyed here with this Pick'em versus Champions. Here we go. I had to refresh my screen. So here we got Bronny James. We've got Scotty Scheffler live on the show here, just to prove to the people that we're going to actually waste money on Bronny James tonight. No, I agree with you. I think with the minutes projected in this matchup against the Atlanta Hawks, pretty good chance that he lucks into 4 rebounds here tonight. There's also what looks like a game here on the board between the Cavaliers and the Golden State Warriors. Obviously, you put the content together. I didn't. I don't know if you like any of these lines. They all seem pretty aggressive. So Bronny James rebounds probably the best option here. Chuck, this was awesome. Anything you want to share with the people before we get out of here?
Nope. Just 50 days left till the NFL season starts. So get drafting. We'll be here more often over the next few weeks. So appreciate you guys watching. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Have a good night. And I think we'll be back at some point tomorrow with another best ball show. So stay tuned for that announcement in the Discord.